Hello, and welcome to the first edition of Corporate Citizenship Watch, a conference board webcast series offering practical insights and tools for companies, investors, nonprofits to meet the changing expectations for the role that businesses play in society. I'm Jeff Hoffman, Corporate Citizenship and Philanthropy Institute leader for the ESG Center here at the Conference Board. The Conference Board is the world's leading independent nonprofit think tank devoted to serving business and society for over 100 years. The ESG Center focuses on corporate governance, sustainability, corporate citizenship, and philanthropy. The Conference Board is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. As such, we're committed to serving not only our members, but also society at large. So that's why today's webcast is being made available to the public and why we're making a wealth of resources available on our COVID-19 crisis hub, which is available to the public. And you can find it at www.conferenceboard.org/COVID-19. Lots of good information there. The COVID-19 pandemic took the world by surprise. Some governments, businesses, NGOs, and other entities had plans for a global health emergency, but most didn't for one of this magnitude. The resulting economic crisis has created a humanitarian crisis. Then we saw the horrific murder of George Floyd, and the world reacted against racial injustices. Early on, corporate citizenship professionals sprang into action, and we've been on the front line ever since. There is no going back. We saw a different world after 9/11 and other significant occurrences that really what we're seeing now eclipses in recent times. What will immediately change and what will evolve? Today, we're going to focus on the interrelated set of health, economic, and social challenges, how the corporate citizenship function has evolved in light of challenges, how companies are maximizing their impact with limited resources, the role of partnerships and collaboration in driving change, and key considerations and learnings to prepare us for what's ahead. So I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of experts. So here you see them twice up on the screen now. And first of all, we have Purvi Bhatt, who is president of the Medtronic Foundation and executive vice president, Medtronic Philanthropy, and she is coming to us from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Next, we have Shanae Harris, Vice President of Corporate Giving and Executive Director at the Prudential Foundation, and a longtime member of the Prudential Financial team, and coming to us from Newark, New Jersey. And last but not least, Alexandra Vonderplag, who is the head of Corporate Social Responsibility for SAP, and she is coming to us from Waldorf, Germany. So she gets the prize for coming the furthest in her late afternoon. So welcome to you all, and we'll get back to you in just a moment, but we do have a few housekeeping notes that we want to make. First, you can download the background materials and the slides for today's presentation in the download section at the bottom of your screen. Please note that you can only access these materials if you are watching this program on a computer. You won't be able to download materials from a smartphone or a tablet. If you would like to receive any materials, please fill out your name in the chat box and we will send it to you after the webcast. Second, please note that the following CEU credits listed here are available for this program. If you would like to receive credits, please note that you have to stay online for the entirety of the live webcast and place your name, email address, and credit type needed in the designated box. For those who want CPE credit, you need to enter your full name, email address, and specify CPE in the credit CPE request, CPE credit space at the bottom of your screen. Please note that there's going to be 3 pop-up messages that will occur during the program to confirm your participation. Please click OK each time you see one, so that means you can't sneak in, out in the middle and then come back in. And then third, I want to underscore that we welcome audience participation in today's session. You can ask questions at any time by entering them into the chat box at the bottom left of your screen. We'll work them into the conversation as time permits. Finally, a few other housekeeping notes. Please complete the evaluation form at the end of today's session so we can incorporate your feedback into future webcasts. You can share this program with your colleagues after the fact, as it will be viewable on demand in a day or 2. You can enlarge the video to full screen view by clicking on the 4 arrows in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And now, without that all out of the way, let's talk about corporate citizenship and today's challenges as companies enter into what is likely to be a new set of normals. And you might notice that how we've been putting the S in normals in parentheses. That's because we know there's going to be many new normals. My normal is going to be different than my colleagues here on the screen, and those based on where we are in the world and our companies and what we're facing and community needs, etc. So we do want to emphasize that we are talking new normals. All righty, so 2019 laid the groundwork for what we thought would be an experiential and research-based look into the future. Our plan was to look out 10 years. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, had been in place for 5 years with 10 to go. Many companies were tracking their efforts against the SDGs. Some of the 17 goals were tracking ahead, such as no poverty, which is number 1, or some were on target and some were falling behind, such as climate action. The investment community had been pushing companies to be more sustainable. Then 2020 happened. COVID-19 has tested us, has tested our companies, communities, and the world more than anything else in recent time. Some of our companies are weathering the storm well, and others, sadly, not so much. We have seen leadership, collaboration, willingness to help that has been heartwarming, those so-called silver linings. The pandemic has also exposed many inequities in our world. The Conference Board surveyed corporate citizenship, corporate social responsibility, and philanthropy professionals in market-leading companies headquartered in the U.S., Europe, and Asia to help shed some light on what the new normals will be for these functions as a result of the social and economic effect of COVID-19. Along with the 104 responses to our survey that was open from May 11th to June 1st of 2020, this report is informed by subsequent discussions within each of our 4 corporate citizenship and philanthropy councils about what the new normals potentially will be as the result of what we have been facing this spring and the work that was done prior to the pandemic starting. Only going to show you 2 slides that will preview a little bit of the data from the report. The report will be coming out soon, so watch out for that. I think this one is particularly of interest. Has the internal prominence of your company's corporate citizenship program increased as a result of the social or economic effects of COVID-19? You know, that's a big number with 84% increase in that. And we're going to talk about some of that because while corporate citizenship, professionals typically are very busy in times of crisis. There has been extra attention placed internally, which in many ways is a good thing, but that additional pressure has also been a lot of extra pressure while we're trying to figure out how we can best serve our communities. The next slide has some interesting data, and again, this is why you should download it because it's way too small for me to really look at myself. But I just want to call attention to the top 5 things that corporate citizenship executives were seeing that we are going to see a change in the future. One is the increase in the amount of corporate citizenship communications and messaging. I think we've already seen that is companies, both internally to employees and externally to communities and society in general about the work they're doing and frankly, how the company can help. Increased engagement from the Executive Committee on Corporate Citizenship Matters, the C-suite. You've probably heard more from the C-suite in the past few months than the past few years. It can be a blessing, of course, and it can also mean, again, that extra pressure. Also, functional and operating executives seeking more guidance from corporate citizenship programs. I think we're particularly seeing that with the racial inequity and racial justice issues and how companies are working even harder to look at all of the work that they do through the equity lens. Further integration of corporate citizenship considerations into business strategy. I think this is an important one for those of us who have been in the field for a long time or seeing a closer alignment between company values, the work that companies are doing from a corporate citizenship perspective, and how it's actually integrated into the company and oftentimes even into the product. So I think this is very exciting, and we'll most likely see more of that in the future. And then last, this one has been particularly interesting, and this is greater community involvement into corporate citizenship strategy and giving priorities. And I think this is one of those areas where I've often talked about how our roles in companies is 1 foot in the company and 1 foot in the community. I think more now than ever, it's really critical that that community and external voice is being heard internally. And that is a role that is oftentimes played by those of you who are on our webcast today. So I'm going to stop talking here because obviously we want to hear from our 3 colleagues on with us today. I think going back to what that first slide said in the perception of the CSR and corporate citizenship function, we've seen a lot of shifts over time on how that function is evolved. What we've seen, whether it be over the last few months and in recent years, is going to create even a bigger shift. So, Shanae, tell us about what you're seeing with that shift in the perception of our functions within companies and specifically at Prudential Financial.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And I would say that I think we would all acknowledge that, I guess, over the last decade, CSR functions have evolved dramatically within corporate functions from kind of distinguished kind of giving programs that in many ways were very separate from the company's business strategy to, I think, what we're seeing now as very much integrated into business strategy and integral to the work of the company. And I think that the current events in 2020 has helped accelerate that process and in many ways has improve the business case for the value of our function. And, you know, the CSR function at Prudential has been on that evolution over the last decade. So we started off as, you know, a very robust program that focused on community. We do a lot of place-based grant making and philanthropy, so that was one of the things that distinguished our work. But in many ways, a decade ago, you know, the work was very centered around looking at one stakeholder, which was the external community stakeholders that Prudential managed and our team managed on their behalf. And the engagement was very much at the top of the house with the CEO and his executive leadership team and how they engaged in community. I would say over the last couple of years, we've really evolved the work to incorporate many of the management principles that occur in shared value, right? This idea that by intentionally collaborating with business leaders, that you could advance the company's commercial goals along with solving complex social problems. And that work really transforms how we engage with our businesses, how we really use resources to support business-aligned work while continuing the philanthropic mandate that we've always had as a company. But in many ways, you know, that work was sanctioned, again, by the executive leadership team and didn't really integrate into the broader company. Last year, ironically, we had went through a CEO transition. And for many of you, I think corporate social responsibility functions are very vulnerable when there's a leadership transition at the top, because so much of the collaboration and partnership is with that leader and their point of view on how these programs carry out. So we spent a big part of 2019 making the case of, you know, our work, our functions, and really onboarding a new leadership group. It helped that at the same time the company was going through transformational work, really thinking about the future of all the business functions as it relates to how do you integrate technology, but how do you think more boldly about disruptive practices and how Prudential's business strategy would carry out in the next decade. So we had the opportunity to actually be a part of that planning process and to be able to frame our value add and our value proposition and all the ideas that we had formulated over years in the context of how that related to other functions within the company's enterprise. And I think doing that work, having that strategy completed at the end of 2019, coupled with, I think, the external environment in 2020, have really kind of created an aha moment and has accelerated a lot of those ideas and I think put us in the forefront of really living out and executing that work. And it's expanded the perception of social responsibility beyond kind of the community giving mandate to being a useful tool in supporting business strategy, to reaching out to diverse consumers, for really thinking about market insights as you think about what the company's consumer base is going to look like in terms of changing demographics. So I think from Prudential's perspective, you know, the current affairs unfortunately has accelerated and become a teachable moment for the value of our function, and I'm sure many of you have experienced similar things as well.
Sinead, that was very interesting. So even though you didn't know that you were in for a major global crisis, you were actually preparing for it over the last year and able to just go into it in many ways with a new point of view, a new structure in order to handle what was ahead. So in a way, and I think it's been interesting when we've had our conversations about what the future is going to look like, you've almost been a test case for it based on the work that you've been doing. So no, really appreciate those comments. So Alexandra, a couple of weeks ago we had our Corporate Citizenship and Community Council meeting, which is a group of European headquartered companies of which you are a founding member of. And, I think one of the things that really struck me was that conversation on resources and our capacities that we have in companies and what we're able to do, and frankly, what you're not able to do. I mean, you've probably been at home more in the past few months than the past few years, because normally, it's like, okay, there's Alexandra, she's in Mexico City, and she's there, and she's here, and but at the same time, it's a different world. Can you talk a little bit about, those, the capacity of being able to accomplish what needs to be done now in the future, and knowing that no one on this call has limited resources, and we just need to be very smart with what we do have?
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff. I mean, not only do we not have unlimited resources, but I do also think that the resources that we have are, because of the COVID-19 crisis, are increasingly under stress. So one of the things that we are fortunately not experiencing within SAP, but that we're hearing from many others in the industry and peers, is because COVID-19 is developing from a health crisis into a massive socioeconomic crisis, with implications that we haven't seen for decades. Every company is obviously also asking themselves, where do we need to tighten the belts? How do we survive? How do we come out of this as a healthy business? And unfortunately, some are looking into the CSR space and into spending there, and look into how they can potentially adapt and reduce. So I think it's something that is happening, and we should call it out, because I think it's not, maybe not the norm yet, but it's certainly a conversation that we're seeing increasingly happening. And because of that, I think we've always, and as Sinead was saying, that I think the whole CSR function has been on such a journey in the last decade. And we've always been sort of tasked with looking at how we can maximize social impact with the resources that we have. But now more than ever, because we're probably under duress in terms of having even more limited resources than we had before, we need to look at how we optimize that. And some of the things that we are doing, and this was really hard to do in the last 3-4 months, because I think in the beginning during COVID-19, everybody was looking at it as a short-term crisis and looking at, how do we respond to that? They were looking at it almost in the sense of disaster relief, right? And from the beginning, we cautioned against that, because we said we don't think that this is going to blow over very soon. And if we're not careful, you are basically asking us in the business to adapt and to make changes in the way that we are utilizing our resources that could potentially mean that we cannot serve our actual strategy and our mission anymore. So we doubled down right from the beginning on our mission. And we said, now is not the time to start losing focus of what we committed to do. We have to keep the business priorities. We have to keep the linkage and the alignment to the business strategy that Sinead was also saying. We have to keep having a very, very clear focus. And while demand is increasing, we have to learn how to say even more than before no, and make sure that we stay the course. So in our case, we have doubled down on quality education and on entrepreneurship, and particularly social entrepreneurship. And we made a commitment to our partners, to our social sector partners, that we are going to try to come out of this crisis together, that we are here to support. We are not going to decrease our funding in them. We're also not going to ask them to stay the course in terms of using those resources for programs that they might not be able to execute on. So we basically allowed them to use them for unrestricted funding. Some of the other things that we realized were incredibly important as well was finding allies, both internally and externally. So convincing them first that this was the right thing to do, so doubling down on our commitments, but looking at where we can find people within the organization that can support us, that can support the mission that we have, that can support the execution of it, both internally and externally. I'll come to externally in a little bit later because I think that would be a good segue to PowerV. And the other thing that we realized is impact measurement. I think this is a tough one for all of us, but I think with I'm going to be very honest, right? I think we at SAP have had a tendency to be very output-oriented when we looked at social impact. And it was wonderful to be able to demonstrate to our leadership and our employees that we were reaching X number of young people across the globe. Wonderful, right? It doesn't tell you much in terms of what actual impact is happening, what is changing, what difference that you're making. And what we realized is that obviously because we have to change all of our programming and our partnerships, outputs are actually decreasing, potentially. Right, so your number of volunteer hours are going to go down, and the number of people that you're reaching are going to go down because you're driving everything in a virtual way. So if we can't rely anymore on outputs, it is high time to start looking into outcomes and impact. And this is a tough one, I think, because I don't think any of us have cracked that nut. We certainly haven't cracked that nut, but we are determined to figure out how do we change the story, how do we change the narrative from outputs toward outcomes that will demonstrate both to the business that we are providing significant value to the business but also to society, especially also in these times. And last, but not least, partnership. We are a huge believer in multi-stakeholder partnership, but above that, in multi-company collaboration. And I think in times of limited resources, now more than ever, and I've heard this for the last 5 years since the Agenda 2030 was implemented or was launched, and that there was increasing conversation around multi-stakeholder collaboration, particularly amongst companies. But there's also a lot of talk, or there was a lot of talk, and it was very hard to actually come to action. When you are under stress in terms of your resources, and when you're starting to realize that you might not be able to reach the impact or generate the impact that you want to with the resources that you have, the most logical thing to do is start looking at partners, at other companies that share your values, that share potentially your mission, but are hopefully complementary to what you are doing in terms of the core competence that their company brings to the table to what you're doing. And I think this is a crucial opportunity that we have today in this time to move the needle from talking about multi-company collaboration and experimenting with it in small ways towards driving a real shift and demonstrating that this is not about our individual company egos. This is truly about social impact. This is about systemic change, and the only way that we can do it is by breaking down the silos amongst the companies, working together, collaborating, and driving collective impact. And we'll bring an example of that a little bit later on, I think.
You did tee that up perfectly for PowerV, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate the comments that you made around resources, because before we leave that, just really quickly, what I do want to underscore, I know a lot of people on the call are beginning to think about their fiscal year 2021 budgets, and while whether your fiscal year is on October 1st or January 1st, et cetera, budget time will be upon the group shortly. And we know because of the resulting economic turndown that expense budgets are being cut, and frankly, our budgets are expense budgets for the most part. So I think that was really critical for you to point that out, because what we have seen are these huge spikes, whether it be, if you look at the stages of the pandemic, you saw all of this money flowing into China in January and February, and then starting in, March through, now and continuing, more so in the Western world, and then, we're seeing these huge spikes that are being felt within different places within the global South. So there is so much need, and I think, staying the course, being true to yourself and true to your strategy is really important, but at the same time, I think we saw all that initial money being thrown at these issues, and at the same time, that we saw on racial injustice issues right now, where big amounts of money are going to a handful of organizations. And I think, to your point, I mean, that type of funding can't necessarily be sustained. And once we get back to what the normals are going to be in the next fiscal year, how are we going to, adjust back to, the CEOs and saying, let's give $5 million to this organization, and you're going, whoa, I mean, so it'll definitely be an interesting time. But I think what you were saying about the importance of collaboration is so true. None of us can do this alone. As much as we think all of our companies and the members of our councils, were so impressed all the time. I mean, Porby over the weekend shared with me a couple of really interesting articles about what SAP has been doing, and while it's so impressive, all of us collectively still aren't necessarily making a dent, and it's that collaboration and scale that's going to be so critical. Even though for a smaller group, we are making important contributions, but when you figure the billions of people that we have in the world, it's going to be the collaboration and scale that's going to take us there. So, Porby, I think it's really interesting the fact that Medtronic and SAP have actually been collaborating. I also think from a collaboration perspective, you're in a very unique location, being in Minneapolis, and how you have collaborated with other companies within the Twin Cities area over the last few weeks. So can you talk to us a little bit more about companies working together?
Sure. Well, thank you, Jeff, and it's so great to be together with Alex and Shanae as well. It's amazing to see these powerful women together with you in this conversation. So thanks for bringing us together in this. Listen, let me just take a step back and just acknowledge that we are based in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, and we are a healthcare company. So we have been, for lack of a better word, in the bullseye of these two massive social pandemics. And that has really pushed us to do a lot of things that have gotten us out of the rhetoric zone into putting things into reality, which we believe we've been doing all along. Like my colleagues, we've got a mission that has been evergreen, and we as a company reflect on that often, and have been modernizing it as with each round of leadership, each round of social pressure has come forward. We've certainly been bringing that mission to life. But I have to say, on a personal level, for myself, and as we hear it across our company, we have, each of us, reflected on that mission in very real ways. And it's over 60 years old, and the foresight of our founders even then to make sure that being a good citizen was included in that mission then has really helped anchor how we think about these issues, which is well before we think about resourcing. First, how do we think about these issues, and then come together in figuring out what is the best response after we've listened. And I can say that with racial injustice together with the pandemic of an infectious disease, listening first was incredibly important. And what we've learned from that is that partnership is flattened fast, that it isn't a hierarchical endeavor. It is requiring that we stay close Across our supply chain, as we saw, for folks who may not know who Medtronic is, we're a medical technology company, certainly was in a big part of the ventilator story in the early phase and now current phase of what's happening with the various rounds of this pandemic. And on the business side, partnering became essential very quickly to be able to meet our goals of rapid production of ventilators all the way through to open sourcing our ventilator specs so that others could move forward. And that is a social responsibility endeavor in being able to think about all of our assets. And that moved even into our philanthropy, certainly in thinking about how do we support the partners we have today, and even in thinking through creatively, how do we partner with others within our industry and deploy the best of our resources collectively. So, and I'll come to our partnership with Alexandra's group and SAP. I think we can both share this story together. But with the pandemic, we partnered quickly with GE Foundation, BMS Foundation, Medtronic Foundation, coming together with our partners to make sure that PPE was deployed quickly to clinics around the country. It took that collaboration to make that happen, and it took the camaraderie of people and institutions to make that happen. And I think the pandemic forced us all to think fast in that way. On the SAP side, I think what is so lovely about that is that it is, of course, about our two companies and our two foundations and our employees, and how we bring skills together to unlock a health issue and a health problem, which is around local community clinics and health workers and their ability to get to scale fast in providing care on the ground, and working with associations like the National Association of Community Health Workers, and specifically looking at primary care in Iowa. But that was all brought together by intermediaries and collaborators so that we could see each other and find each other. And sometimes it's hard. It's not necessarily silos based on dogma that keep us apart. It's just at times you don't see through the fog of the work that's happening who the best puzzle pieces are to come together. And just listening again was really important in bringing us in close collaboration. And then to your point about the murder of George Floyd and what's happened here, this is our hometown. We're a healthcare company that was deep in the response for a pandemic, and just as we felt like maybe we were starting to settle down, racial injustice hit us very hard. And it is not something that isn't always hitting us hard. It's just now so visible, felt, and seen everywhere. And when it happened here, it was clear that we needed to come together quickly again. But first, listening not only to our own employees who were feeling, of course, the pain very palpably, but also knowing very well what the community needs. We're in the community. But also to, again, our partners and other companies who were working closely to come together. I think across the board, we've been thinking and behaving in a way that puts meaningfulness first and resources second. And have been holding as tight as possible to the imperative of impact. We've been steering into that for quite some time over certainly in the last couple of years, to really ensure that it is going beyond the outputs, as Alex is saying, and into the impact so that people are actually getting healthier, and our partners are showing that, and that we are managing portfolios to that end. But I'll say, when things come at you fast and quite candidly, in moments that are crises, that people shift into a playbook of an emergency response, which isn't always the right playbook, it's really easy to decide the money matters more. It's really easy to just get sucked into thinking that became the outcome metric, and it isn't. And it takes a lot of internal fortitude, I think, for teams like ours, as well as just good dialogue with partners to help steer in. And the long trusted partners that we've had over time have been the ones that have guided us through this period together. We've listened to them and have learned together from that vantage point. And so we are still in a frame of impact first. Judge us on the impact that we generate, not by the dollars that we give. Because it's already not enough for the first dollar you put down. It will just always be not enough. And I think we're on a constant journey of learning together on that. And what I will say, and I'll end on this, is that, I think we were all wondering what virtual volunteerism would look like. I'll just hone in on our volunteerism and our employees and the enthusiasm and the real need to give. As everyone got sequestered home and we're in shelter in place, And all of a sudden, we're disconnected to such an extent. There was such a need, even virtually, to do something. And it has surpassed what our outcome metrics could have been. I think we all thought it would be less, and actually it's turned into more. And with all of the campaigns that we've been able to double down in, I'm very proud of our team who worked incredibly hard to fast move into virtual volunteerism as we were kicking off our season of volunteering, but then quickly move into racial injustice as a way of a response. Both things happened at the same time, and we were able to galvanize a lot of opportunity for our employees, but also a release valve so that we can show each other that we care. And it really has turned into shifting from constraints into opportunities. And I think we're all very proud of how we've come together in that, and how we found great friends in the process, like Alex and SAP, and what we're doing together with our volunteers and efforts.
Good. Well, thank you, Porby. I'm so glad that you had mentioned the employee volunteer piece, because I think that is so important. And all three of the companies here and so many of those who are participating today have really good employee volunteer programs, have very committed employees who truly want to make a difference in the community. And I think that the virtual volunteering, and sadly I think there's probably more demand for people to virtually volunteer than on the supply side of what those opportunities were and quality experiences. And I think that for all of us in the corporate volunteering world, that we have learned a lot from this. And again, another one of the new normals is our corporate volunteer programs, and how it is more of a blend from the traditional roll up our sleeves and the hands-on and we're out in the community. And then the work that we've been doing around skill-based volunteering and pro bono, of which still a lot of it was taking place in person, and those type of activities can certainly be done, a lot of them virtually, more so than if you can't plant trees virtually very well. But still, I think going to what really struck me with what you said was impact first. And so I think whether it is with our employee volunteer programs and in really looking at what is creating the most impact in there and looking into the future, how do we craft our programs, with that in mind, and not so much, bound by the resources, but really looking at that impact. So whether it's employee volunteering, whether it's our giving or collaborations or work in communities, I think that's all really, really important. So we've talked about what is taking place now. What do you think we have learned? And I think the volunteering piece is a part of it, that we've learned over the past few years and the past few months that will dramatically alter the way corporate citizenship looks in the future, functions within our companies, and also interacts with our communities and society. Open it up. Whoever wants to.
I can do a quick response,
Sure.
just echoing from where we sit as Medtronic. I think what has, I believe we have shifted now from being business aligned to truly being collaborative and integrated in a different way. And the reason why is I think that it's very clear that our work is truly the porous membrane that connects the company into society and back, and that is a complicated space. And I think the realization of that complexity is everywhere now. It isn't just, oh, that team deals with that. It's that in order to function, period, we have to now accept these complexities and find the opportunity. And in the last few months, we've had to quickly turn the complexity into opportunity, and it's been happening. And again, because we happen to be a healthcare company also sitting inside of the Twin Cities, we've had to find that nexus quickly to truly be in this not only in this work, but to be a viable partner for this community and the sector that we're in. And so I do believe that that shift is a big lesson, and I don't believe we're in a situation where we have to defend our existence. Every executive, every employee is deeply engaged now on these issues because they're right in front of us, and that engagement alone pulls us all together in delivering these kinds of impacts. And so, you know, our team certainly had dashboards and really was articulating quantifiable impacts in the past. And now we realize some of that will change because you can't expect the same in these conditions now. But the expectation that you will deliver impacts, and this is a norm now, is there, and it is felt across us. And I think that's a really rich place for us to be in now, is in that level of moving away now from just alignment alone to fully being appreciative of the complexity and opportunity and working together.
And I think that complexity, turning complexity into opportunity, is a really good point. And Alex, when we were on our prep call last week, I think you had just got off the phone with your team in India. And you talk about complexity and looking at the future and different needs at different times. How are you viewing managing a global enterprise that you have within your function and obviously within your company, where you were experiencing different needs based on the pandemic in different places all at the same time? I mean, it just must be a daunting task, and no wonder that you're on the phone 10 hours a day.
That's a tough one, but I think the most important thing is that you, and we've worked hard on that in the last years, is that we have a global strategy, we have a global mission, we have global operating principles, but then we localize completely. So there is not, there's very few global partnerships that we have. There is not one program that we do that hits all of our markets, right? So there's not that one thing that we developed that we said, okay, we're going to roll this out in every single market. But what we have said is, here's the strategy, here are the principles, here's the narrative that we want to create, and now we need to regionalize it and localize it. And we take that same approach to any kind of, I mean, it's luckily, we don't have global crises happening all the time, and let's hope that we are coming out of this spin that we're in right now and that nothing else sort of hits us in the same way. But we try to take that same reasoning and approach towards COVID-19 as well. We said, okay, we have a global playbook, but at the same time we need to adapt it locally completely. But allow me to say one thing, because I know that on this call it's all CSR practitioners, and allow me to say something that I say to my team members time and time again. And that's, in times like these, it's very easy to despair a little bit, faced with the immense needs that are out there. And I think all of us are very driven and very passionate and very committed to making a difference. And it gets sometimes very hard to switch off. And when I was speaking with my colleagues in India last week, and I see that every single time I speak with them, because you take an issue, a problem, and you look at it in the Indian context, and it's accelerated 10 times, and it's scaled 10 times, just because of the sheer volume of people, of the population that we're talking about. And I think we have to protect ourselves as well, personally a little bit, by making sure we're incredibly focused. Because if we pull ourselves into too many different directions, First, we will see that we're not making the impact that we want to make anymore. But secondly, we're slithering towards personal burnouts, right? And you don't want that to happen. But it's easy to do, especially in times like these. So all I can say again is, it's prioritizing, it's focus. It's what Parvi was saying, it's staying the course and having really difficult conversations and explaining to our business why it is so important to keep doing what we're doing. Because that way we're also protecting our team members, because we're allowing them to keep working on what's important, and we're allowing them to say no. But we're also allowing them to switch off at the end of the day, which I think is probably a challenge for all of us. And frankly, it's something I struggle most with. It's that you're at work the whole time, right? I mean, nonstop. I mean, your home is your work now, and figuring out sort of this new balance in this new reality is something that I think we all need to work on, and work on our mental health while we're at it.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think that's a challenge that all of us face. It's certainly a challenge that we talk a lot about essential workers during this time, frontline workers, and we need to take care of ourselves first, because otherwise, if we aren't well, we can't take care of everybody else that we're dealing with. So I think those are very wise words. And you talked about India, you talk about global, you talk about regionalized, and then talk about local. And Shanae, I want to go to hyper-local, with you. When you and your CEO hosted our CSR Council a year or so ago in Newark, Prudential has an incredible story within Newark, in your community to that city for, 150 years or something, which is amazing. But you also have a very personal story connected to Newark. And where does that whole integration work between you, the person, Newark, your family, the company in Newark? Because at the end of the day, we all talk about these big global and national strategies, but it's in our local communities where the change really happens.
So I think it's interesting to kind of frame the personal and the connection to the work and the strategy, because I think all of us are dealing with that, particularly when you have a crisis that impacts you on multiple levels, including personal. Prudential is headquartered in a majority African-American community, and decided to remain even after the civil unrest in the late 60s. And in many ways, we're seeing similar conditions that occurred back then. But what anchored kind of our corporate social responsibility approach in that is to acknowledge that if we were going to remain in the community, we were going to act as a member of the community, not someone from the outside, but grappling with how do you rebuild our hometown, and how are we a stakeholder among many that are actively working at grappling with these issues. That has centered our role as an anchor institution in the community, and has centered the philosophy that I think our team brings to the work in a place-based fashion. I think, my leadership of our philanthropic strategy and growing up in the city made the company's mandate and their value proposition to how they approach corporate social responsibility in the context of Newark, and my connection to the city as a very organic thing. So in many ways, my orientation of feeling like I'm a member of the Newark community personally. I have family and friends and a broad network in the community, and the work that we're doing at Prudential naturally becomes integrated. And I think that's important, particularly when we come with crises like we're dealing with. I think an interesting anecdote as it relates to Newark, and there like every major city, there was protests really and acknowledging the crisis of police brutality. And, Newark, which is a small city, had about 12,000 people demonstrating, during that same period that there was, kind of this outreach and outcry. What was interesting, and I think the New York Times cited it in an article, is that unlike other cities, Newark, the protests did not become violent. And they were trying to unpack why, particularly because of the city's narrative in the late 60s. And I think, there's multiple factors that attributed to that. We have an amazing mayor who is an activist and really embraced and acknowledged and channeled the city's kind of concern about the current affairs. We have the lessons learned when, protests do become violent and the impact on community and the decades-long effort that it's taken to rebuild Newark as a community. But I also think that when you're bringing stakeholders across sectors together, you can come up with innovative solutions on how to deal with social issues. So one of the things that Prudential and other stakeholders in the city invested in is a community outreach program that trained community outreach workers or local residents to help de-escalate violence in the community. And when the protests occurred, many of those folks were out in the community, and when there were instances of violence or activities, in many ways, I think like with many communities, led or instigated by people who are not residents of the community, I think there was the ability to de-escalate that and to really say, we're not going to be violent here. This is our community. And that even led to, I think, even the perception or relationship that residents have with the business community, which can naturally have inherent tensions. But I think the strength of putting, money in the bank, so to speak, as it relates to cultivating relationships, being at the table for years and decades, is that whether we are aligned philosophically on every agenda, there's an understanding that companies like Prudential are at the table and members of the community. And I think that counts when grappling with the societal issues that we're dealing with, that talk about race and equity and, some of the challenges and friction that occur in that area.
And I think that's so important, the fact that you have been at the table. And I think one of the challenges that we've seen, particularly on the racial justice issues, of a lot of companies, frankly, trying to be at the table in the past few weeks that haven't been at the table, and that's more challenging, and that's where that long-term strategy and plan of being a part of the community and your own, personal connection, which I think, certainly rang true when I read that New York Times article on Newark. And it was like, yeah, that's what Sinead was talking about when we were walking through the communities and meeting with community leaders and on the bus going around and you pointing out things that were personal to you and your family. And I think, at the end of the day, we're talking about people. So I think that's really, really important. I know we're just about out of time. There were a couple of points in the comment box I just want to make. One was about companies and, how many are doing CSR. I mean, obviously, I think you see the bigger companies doing corporate citizenship work, but there's huge opportunities for medium and small-sized companies to get engaged in this type of work. Many already are. Also a question on measurement, which I think was really important. And I would point people to the work we've done around the impact genome within the conference board and an expansion to that work that we'll be talking about in the coming months around the price of impact. So something to keep on your radar. Any 15-second parting comments from the three of you? Or have you said it all?
I think this function is well set up in enterprises to take the long view, and that's something that I think, you know, the demands of business results cycles don't allow many other parts of the company to be able to do. I think that will be important as we tackle these long-term, complex social issues. And that's important increasingly as I think society is expecting corporations to really show up in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add that this is our time to embrace the S. There's a lot of ESG conversation now. These two crises, these two moments, you can see it is all down the S category, and this is our time to do that. So throw off the things that don't work, keep the things that do, and chase after the S with real meaning.
Alexandra?
Yeah, I think I'm going to come back to collaboration. I think now is the time to really try, despite, you know, us being, you know, fighting on many fronts and obviously not having a lot of time. I do think it is worthwhile to invest the time and the energy to explore multi-company collaborations. It's not easy to do, and it's not something that can be done overnight. But even starting in the smallest way is a start and is a step in the right direction. So I would just love to encourage everybody to take that time and to take that energy to see how we can work with each other and drive collective impact and drive real systemic change.
So embrace community, embrace collaboration, embrace the S. I think those are all wonderful parting comments. Thank you so much, Alexandra, Shanae, Horvey. I mean, what a powerful and important conversation. Look forward to continuing it with all of you. And thank you all for those of you who have participated on the call today. As I mentioned at the outset, the Conference Board has a wealth of resources to help the private and public sectors address the COVID-19 pandemic. The slide deck that's posted in the download section at the bottom of your screen has links to more recent and upcoming webcasts on the topic as well as recent publications. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, I also encourage you to subscribe to our Corporate Citizenship and Philanthropy blog and our newsletter by hitting the subscription link that is available on the presentation. So thanks for joining us today. Please don't forget to complete the evaluation so we can incorporate your feedback into future webcasts. Again, appreciate having you here with us today. To all of you, keep up the great work that you're doing out in the communities. They need it now more than ever. Thank you so much.
Thank you.